Okay, today we're going to go about the steps of diagnosing a no start condition. So you come out to the car, you got the choke out, you try to turn the car over, and nothing happens. So, obviously for anyone who knows how a car engine works, you need three things. So there's air, there's fuel, and there's spark. As well as, there's a fourth thing really, that the engine has to have compression or else it will not fire. So that's the fourth thing you can check for. But the three main things are air, fuel, and spark. With the assumption that usually compression is not your problem. Usually it's not a problem with a bad engine. It's just you're missing one of the three components. And usually air is not one of them, unless you have some type of clog issue or problem with a major leak, a vacuum leak or something. It's usually on the fuel side or the ignition side. So we'll go through some of the steps, some of the things to look for when diagnosing this type of problem, and so things to look for. Okay, on the fuel side, you got the two pump. Well, in my case, I have two pumps. In this picture here, you can see the SU pump to the right and my electric pump to the left. So obviously, when you turn the ignition on, the pump should start. So it's wired to the ignition side of the circuit of the electrics, and so you should get the pump should start ticking over, or in the case of the electric pump, it should start ticking as well. I mean, the electric pump sounds differently. I'll show you the differences in sounds for the two pumps, but here's what you should get. So you turn the ignition switch on with the and the SU pump should tick over. Okay, so those ticks are building up pressure. So if it doesn't tick, if you don't get any ticks in your SU pump and it's been a while since you've started the car, then you have an issue with your pump, because it should build up pressure every time you turn the ignition switch to the on position. Now, just for comparison's sake, I'll turn the car ignition switch on with the electric pump engaged, and I'll show you what that sounds like. So you can hear that low rumbling. That's what the electric pump sounds like, and other electric pumps might be different, but that's how this unit sounds. Alright, once we know the pump's working at the back, obviously we want to make sure that the fuel is getting to the carburetors. So the pump is providing pressure to the fuel lines. You want to check under the vehicle, make sure there's no leaks. Obviously you'd be able to smell the fumes from the fuel if you had a leak, so that's one clear indication. Also, make sure if you have an inline filter, it should have fuel in it. It might not be completely filled. You can see mine here it's got air in there, but that's alright. Another thing you can do is pull off the lines here, and you should get a spray of fuel. Put some type of catch can under there, or a towel. But if the pressure isn't getting to the carburetors, obviously you're going to have a fuel problem. and so you have to diagnose and fix that. Obviously, the carburetors themselves meter the fuel, so part of checking the fuel system would be to pop off this the air cleaner and check the carburetors, make sure that the needles are good and that everything's working properly in them. I'm not going to go through that just because I like to work simplest to hardest, so I'd rather not pull off the carbs and do a full diagnostic there, but check the simple things first and then go into the more difficult things when you're trying to diagnose some type of car problem. So with no start, we'll go on from the fuel. Now that we've checked the easy things with the fuel system, we'll go on to the ignition system. So ignition system obviously has the battery connected to the coil providing the spark through the distributor to each of the spark plugs. So you want to check your spark plugs are not broken, so check each of the spark plugs, take the leads off, make sure that the spark plug isn't cracked or broken. You can actually pull them all off, make sure that they're not completely fouled. And what I mean by fouled is that the terminal on the end of the spark plug, here I'll grab an old one. So you want to make sure that the terminal is not completely black or completely white, meaning that it's either running too hot or there's too much fuel and it's not burning. If it is completely black, then that gives you an indication of a problem, because a completely blacked out spark plug that's completely fouled means there's a lot of fuel getting in there but there's no spark, so that'll give you a hint that, hey, I probably have an ignition problem. So you check those. Here's some bad ones. Obviously, if you have a cracked spark plug lead top, and that's not going to be good. So this one was cracked and loose, and so I ended up just being able to pull it right off. Another problem is this one over here. You can see this will take 2 hands. So you can see here, I don't know if it'll come out, but I can twist this, and so this is a bad spark plug. It's got some problems there. This ceramic portion here should be completely seated, and it shouldn't be able to twist it like that. So it's got a problem. It's also got a bent terminal at the end, so I don't know if that you can see that it's bent. So somewhere along the line that one had a problem, so we don't want to throw that one away, not use that obviously. Here's one that's good, so you can see you can't twist this top. It should be in there nicely firmly seated. You want to make sure that these tips can be screwed in. You want to make sure they're fully seated on there. So that's the spark plugs. So once the spark plugs are good, you want to put them back in. You want to make sure that they're firmly seated, so tighten them all the way down and then go a quarter turn or so is a good rule of thumb to make sure they're fully seated. That way you can make sure you're getting your compression. I talked earlier about you needing to have compression. So if you have all your spark plugs are loose because you just removed them to check them and you didn't tighten them back down, then you're not going to have any compression, and either the car won't start or it'll run really poorly. Okay, the next thing on checking the ignition is you can get these little covers. These are just little lights that will flash as the signal to spark is going through. So you just push these onto the end of the spark plug, and then you put your lead on the end, and so that should spark. I got 4 of them. They come in a pack of 4. They were really cheap, less than 10 bucks I think. And so I got them on the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 cylinder here. And so when I turn the car over, I should see these firing. The light should flash, and that'll give me an indication whether or not I have a problem with my distributor or maybe the coil. Another thing I can check on the coil is that it should be getting 12 volt positive. So the first thing I will do is I'll attach a positive lead here on my multimeter, and then ground out the negative here, and then with the ignition switch in the on position I should be getting 12 volt positive power between here and here. If I'm not, then I got a problem with this white cable, which goes and it connects through the that one connects through and gets its power from the ignition switch, obviously, but the ignition switch runs through the tachometer, so there might be a problem either with the line from the ignition switch to the tach or the tach out to here, and that's causing you to lose your 12 volt positive to your coil. So if you're not getting any power to your coil, the coil won't send a signal to spark when the distributor tells it to. So that's a real easy first step to check. So what I'm going to do now is crank the engine over, and I should, if I've got all these connected right and everything is seated, I should get lights flashing as the car tries to turn over. Another way to do it is if you have a multimeter with an RPM that can measure RPM from an engine, you can hook that up here, and as the car tries to turn over, it'll send a signal to the multimeter and tell you what RPM the engine is turning over. So you should get a reading here as the engine tries to turn. If you're not, then there's no spark going through that number 1 lead. So what I'll do is I will try to turn the car over, and we'll see if we can get any flashing lights. And I'm going to turn this overhead light off so we can better see the flashing. Okay, so you'll be looking for flashing coming from each of these test lights. Alright, so nothing. I got no flashing. That's obviously a problem. So I got a problem with somewhere in the ignition system. So let's see if we can diagnose and figure out what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my coil to make sure the coil's good. So I'm going to pop that off, and I'll test using a multimeter the coil. You can see here, you should be able to test this on the resistance, the ohms measurement here, between these 2 outside terminals. So you check there, and you should get a reading. I am not getting any reading on this Bosch coil. This is a brand new coil I just purchased, so that's not a good sign. You can see here, just for comparison's sake, what it should look like if you check the resistance, and it's about 3 ohms. So nothing. Also, you can check the inside to the negative, and you can see there it's about 8,000 ohms. And again, for the other side, the positive side to the HT lead is again about 8,000 ohms. This one, the negative side to the center is 7,500 ohms, so that looks good. But the positive side to the center HT lead, nothing. So something's wrong on this side of the coil. It's not getting the continuity. It's not connected. Somewhere in there is probably a burnt out wire or something. I don't know, but this coil is bad. So I think we've ID'd our problem. Good thing I have this old coil that I can go back to, and this one's brand new, so I'm going to send it back for replacement. I don't know, a lot of other people have these Bosch coils. They should be good. This one I got off of Amazon. Obviously parts fail. You get a dud every now and then, so I'm going to send this back and get a new one. Okay, so now I got that new coil, or the old coil, which is the good coil, reinstalled. So I'm going to show you what these test lights look like when everything works properly. So hopefully, if I've gotten all the problems worked out, and that coil was the only thing wrong with the no start, then I should be able to turn the engine over and it should start no problem. So we're going to go ahead and give it a whirl, and it should start right up. Alright, so you can see there that that's what it should look like. And also, if you have, like I said, your multimeter can measure RPM. You can also measure the RPM and make sure you're getting a spark that way. Okay, so you can see there that obviously the fix worked, and that coil was my problem and my only problem. So again, a good thing to have are these leads. They're cheap and they're come in handy for test and spark. Make sure you're getting good ignition. So obviously the only thing left to do is just to pull these off, put them in my toolbox for later, and I'll send back that coil to Amazon and get a new one. Okay, obviously I got pretty lucky that was an easy thing to fix and diagnose. And I also got lucky that I had an old coil lying around. Other things you can check on the ignition side is your leads. Make sure that they're all seated, both in the distributor and on your spark plugs. Make sure that your distributor cap is on properly, and that you can check to make sure that your boots here are not corroded or broken. Make sure that they're properly on, and that you don't have any problems with them cracked or falling apart. My distributor was just sent off to Advanced Distributors to get reconditioned, so I knew that was not the problem. And the car had just turned over and started earlier after I checked the timing and I installed the distributor. So I knew the distributor was installed correctly, and I knew that that probably was not the problem. So other things, obviously, you can check on the fuel side are the carburetors. So you can take them apart, do a full service on the carburetors. The air, like I said, other than obvious things like your air filters are completely gummed up, or a rat came in and built a nest inside your air cleaner, and so you're not getting any air at all. Obviously the carburetors have to do with air metering as well, so if your carburetors are bad or fully fully open, or they're not opening properly or working correctly, then you're going to have issues with air as well there. But that just goes over a couple of extra things that you can check. Like I said, compression is one of them. I do have another video on checking the compression, so you can, I'm not going to test that. You can check that other video out if you so desire. And that's it. Hope this helps, and if you have an issue like this with the bad coil, then the coils don't usually go bad, so this one's kind of a unique problem. And they're pretty reliable, so just kind of one of those one-off issues that hopefully you never have, but sometimes parts go bad.